I thought the Illuminati was going to be like a daily problem for me. I was like, oh my gosh.
Or making videos twerking on the devil.
These families, these banks, these corporate entities.
No, be quiet. Stop saying stuff like that.
If you knew the truth, you wouldn't sin.
But we're born just seeking pleasure.
Astral projection out of our bodies, out of the Matrix.
The people that we find inspiring are showing us something within ourselves that we haven't tapped into.
All right, so my theory with Elon Musk was that, okay, so you have the Truman Show, right? And there's this whole concept about like being able to break out of that like show, whatever, Matrix. But do you guys actually think you guys can break out of Matrix?
It depends on what you mean by the Matrix. Like, is the Matrix the entire... I mean, yeah, you can, I guess. You could go live on top of a mountain and meditate. Like the monks in Nepal aren't really in the Matrix. They're just nobody bothers them and they go do their thing.
Yeah.
If you want to have like a cool life, you kind of have to dance around inside the Matrix and know the rules. That's
what I'm saying. So like, no matter how much money you have, I think you still, to an extent, have to play by the rules, right?
It's like being that's why they call it NPCs. It's like you're an NPC if you have no ability to actually autonomously play within the game, and you're an actual character in the game if if you've set your life up in such a way that you have the freedom to be an actual character inside the Matrix. Nobody really wants to escape the Matrix. Like, the game, I feel like, is you want to use the Matrix to your advantage, and then you just get to enjoy it. Like, Andrew Tate doesn't want to go live in like the mountains somewhere. He likes his Bugatti and shit.
Yeah, I think Andrew Tate also personifies the Matrix slightly differently, because he would say, like, if you asked Tate, he probably said, yeah, I've escaped the Matrix, but it's like, okay, but you got locked up for 90 days. Like, you're still, I think if we define the Matrix as like the powers that be in terms of like the UN, NATO, all the hands of the government, the big banks, all that, it's like you're never going to escape that. That's why when I talk about in content stuff, I'll be like,
but you get so rich and you move to Mars.
And move to Mars? Well, I would say that it's like I want financial freedom. And I understand there's no such thing as real freedom, but as free as I can possibly get is like a good thing to strive for. And that may mean, the idea, which I'm getting to the point where I don't even know if this works, but like the idea of like, oh, you have multiple passports, you have multiple banks with different money and stuff. But sometimes I'm like, even then it's like, it's the Matrix. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I guess I would say like, you can't fully escape it, but I think you can maybe like dip a toe out to where it can't like devastatingly blow you.
What if
you
can actually escape it, but we're like
brainwashed
into thinking that we can't?
They want us to think we can't escape, but we can escape.
Exactly. So imagine this, right? Imagine like it was
astral projection
I'm
out of our
exaggerating.
bodies, out of the Matrix.
Dude, maybe. But imagine like this is an exaggeration, right? But I said the whole move to Mars thing, right? So let's say a person realizes they can escape the Matrix, but if you put somebody like Elon Musk in place where he's already working towards getting to Mars, he's already doing all that stuff. So in your head, you're like, oh, someone's already doing it. Let's just wait for him to finish it. Right. So like, but imagine if he actually isn't, right? He's just there so that nobody else tries to do what he's trying to do and leave the earth. You know what I mean?
Kind of like said it like
they put
like
somebody
King of the Hill, like he's like, I got Mars, fuck y'all, or what?
Not like that. It's more like, oh, he's on it already. Just let him do his thing. And because of that, we just sit here and wait like patiently instead of us trying to escape it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's like, hey, we're gonna put somebody in place that's super intelligent, super smart. That way, nobody else feels like they can actually escape it.
Do you think Mars would be the escape of the Matrix? Because I feel like if we colonize Mars.
I think for one person,
you could argue either Elon makes his own Matrix or Elon is an arm of the Matrix that controls Mars.
So if you're the Elon Musk, I think that's like the only way you actually can escape the Matrix. But I think if you're not him, like you have to be at the top. If you're not at the top, I think you're
so like multiple. So like one of the richest men ever, if you exclude like the Saudis and shit, like multiple billions of dollars is like how to escape. But even then, billionaires are still part of the Matrix because most billionaires, when you look into like the cabal and like the powers that be and all that shit, it's like most of them are controlled by certain corporate interests, certain governments of certain countries and intelligence agencies, and most of them are blackmailed and compromised. Like that's why, like the powers that be or whatever, like if Epstein wanted to bribe a cop to get someone out of jail or something, he'll just give them money. But if Epstein wanted to control a billionaire politician or a billionaire of some corporation, it's like, no, I got to get dirt on you. I got to make you do some dastardly deed on video because that's how I control you. But it's like still in the Matrix, even though you're a billionaire.
Actually, since we're talking about this, let's tone it, let's pull it back really hardcore. So we'll start with, what do you consider to be the Matrix? What are other things you call the Matrix?
I was getting ready to say that because like there could be mini matrices and then macro matrices, and you can break out of different matrices. Like the idea that you have to work a 9 to 5 and then you realize you can be an entrepreneur and there's a level of freedom with that. That's a matrix you broke out of. I would think even you could think of like Jay-Z and the hip hop artists in the early 2000s, late 90s who built their own record labels to control their own production.
Jay-Z is a matrix in itself.
Like, he went from being a like kind of in a matrix to becoming the Matrix in a sense, but he broke out of that thing, and people do that kind of stuff all the time. So I think to answer the question about the Matrix stuff, it's like, would you even want to break out of the Matrix? What would that look like? Like really, like again, would you just be living? In terms of
like what the broad matrix?
Yeah, like when you're out of the macro matrix. So
what do you?
I suppose the macro matrix is just the system of the social system we all operate within.
Social system. Cool. Is there anything else you'd call the Matrix? Like, have you ever called it anything else?
It's the social system we operate within, and it is controlled by certain people, and it's always going to be controlled by certain people. It always has been controlled by certain people, and the idea that it's a matrix comes from the fact that we don't like the people controlling it, or they don't have our interests. If the people who were in charge had our interests in mind, we wouldn't even care that it was a matrix.
Kenny, what do you think? What would you consider the Matrix being?
Yeah, I like his idea of like the Matrix is a good label for systems, with the overall theme, like the movie being there's systems that you want to escape, and that, you know, maybe the leaders of the systems are baddies or whatever. But when I tend to think about what is our enemy, I don't like to use the term the Matrix too much unless I'm kind of memeing because Tate made it so popular. But I like the idea of like naming entities, like, well, I like calling out names. So it's like this intelligent agency, these corporations, these banks, these families, these whatevers, instead of like the Matrix, which like blankets them all. And it kind of like, I like the idea of Matrix for like little, like smaller scale. Like you could say the school is a Matrix, college is a Matrix, 9 to 5, all that's are matrices. But if you're gonna like really think of what we're up against, or at least what we're trying to lessen their control over us of, I think you need to get more specific in terms of like certain governments, certain corporations, certain whatevers.
I think it's a good point, because when you call it the Matrix, it becomes this like abstract idea that you really don't even know what to do about. But when you look at it, it's really like common sense what happens. So like people who know people work in their own best interests, and then all the people who know everybody, they just like, inequality is a natural byproduct of anything that's ever existed. And so people with power conglomerate more power, and so it just gets isolated into fewer and fewer hands, and everybody in that club knows each other, and they have an agenda, and that agenda is not the same as these people that they don't even know, that they just see as a resource for them to use, which is average people. When you look at it like that, you realize it's like, it's just people with connections doing stuff with each other. It's like they're working together, and yeah, maybe they are up to a lot of nefarious things.
I was gonna say, that's when you need to start, because like that's gonna be with everyone, good and bad, like networking connections. I think the difference is with the powers that be, the baddies, is that when we look into pretty much all of them, we see very bad moral implications. It's like everything they do is morally shady, it's corrupt. You can even argue it's evil in certain aspects of things, versus there's plenty of times where partnerships are good and working together is good, when this is like very extremely nefarious. And like you were saying, everyone knows each other, and there's also like a handful of families that their bloodlines just carry on, and some of them become presidents and the leaders of the banks and the corporations. And it's like they are born with their parents telling you, all these people that you see, the common folk, they're not even real. They're NPCs, they're fodder, they're peasants. It doesn't matter. They're pawns in the game, and we're the fucking chess masters. So they're raised believing that, and they become the next generation. Then it goes on and on. And I think it's hard to really personify the Matrix. So it's like, I feel like it has to be a chart of like the trees of like these families, these banks, these corporate entities, these countries and their intelligence agencies, these governments. And it's like a whole fucking crazy spider web of things. That's why I think it's more important to understand like this problem is from this problem is from that, instead of the whole, oh, it's the Matrix. Is like, if you just, like you were saying, if you just do the too vague, broad term of the Matrix on things, I think it's, even though it's safe, which is like I know Tate got banned on stuff, but it's safe to like say, oh, the Matrix. It's a little more controversial to start naming names, naming companies, corporations, entities, families, whatever.
Well, I think also it's set up like this, but I mean, you even can look back, like I was saying, it's kind of like a normal thing that happens over time. Is this gathering of power at the top amongst a few people, and they have an agenda, and and definitely right now it does appear that they're up to a lot of bad stuff. But you think about these things actually fade a lot faster than we think too. Like the churn at the top, I think, is actually more dramatic than we realize. Like, I have no idea who George Washington's ancestors are, and he ran America when it first started. Andrew Carnegie, I don't know if his family has anything to do with it. And he was the richest man in the world for a time at the beginning of the 20th century. I think it was Alex Hormozy was saying either his grandfather or his great grandfather was actually an emperor in Iran. Like, he was part of one of this like royal household, and he had 100 wives. And now it's like his father, Alex Hormozy's father, ended up in America as just an average middle class dude. 2 generations later, all of that wealth, all of that status, all that power wiped out. There is actually a little bit more churn at the top of this thing than I think we realize. I think it's because just natural things rise and fall. I think sometimes we need to stop looking at it like it's this thing that we can't do anything about, and realize actually like it kind of flips over all the time, and we actually have more power than we think. Because I mean, think about the reason it was William McKinley was the president before Teddy Roosevelt, and he got put in there by all the robber barons who wanted to consolidate their power, and they didn't want the trust getting broken up. They made Teddy Roosevelt the vice president because they wanted him to have no power, pretty much. They wanted him in this position that was mostly ceremonial, out of the way, because he wanted to create all the antitrust laws and stuff. And then McKinley ends up getting assassinated. Teddy Roosevelt becomes president. He's wildly popular. All the antitrust laws come into place, and they break up the monopolies. And just like that, like, we're able to do something about what was basically the matrix of that time period. I think we need to give ourselves more credit for the fact that we actually have more we can do about these things than sometimes I think we like to think.
I agree. I don't want it to push us into like nihilism, where it's like the common person can't do nothing, because at the end of the day, we put these people in power and we let them remain in power, so thus we have the power. It's just most people are bots and we'll never fucking realize that. But I would push back and argue, like, if we look in history, we can see the rise and falls of certain emperors, but I think it's changed in terms of the last 100, 200 years, where I do think it's like a certain handful of groups at the very top that have consolidated power, and I don't think there's a churn for the most part. I think maybe in the mediary of like the puppet masters and then their puppets, and then maybe those puppets, there's plenty of churn rotating in and out. You know, perhaps, like you could argue like, oh, Sam Bankman-Fried was part of the Matrix or whatever, because he was like he was
a tool of it.
And then you realize, well, like, they used him for what he was worth, and they scapegoated him, and he like outed him out. Like, there's churn with those people, but I think the top of the top, we've gotten to the point where they're quite literally too big to fail unless some crazy drastic stuff happens. At least in terms of like Western countries, the global economic or the World Economic Forum, and globalists and all that. There's not much churn with that if you like go back down their ancestral roots and the history of it and the central banks and all that. So I would say maybe once the central banks came in, the World Economic Forum, that's where it kind of solidified some of the puppet masters.
It'll be interesting to see if America does what happens with the central bank digital currency in America. That'll kind of, I feel like, decide if the matrix is solidified or not.
I think it's terrifying.
That will solidify it.
I have faith that most people will be like,
they don't like it. I don't think
they're gonna be like, they're
it.
not gonna buy into it. I think most people are smart enough to be like, oh, so you can just fully monitor everything, turn off my account, take money out of my account in terms of fines or tax whenever you want. I think I have faith, even though there's so many idiots, I have faith that there will be enough pushback to where it'll at least delay it for a while. I just want us to be able to escape enough to avoid that before they fucking start instilling that. Like, as long as we can like have a couple country bank accounts, some gold, some silver, like all this shit, to where it's like we don't have to actually forcibly move all of our bank account and cash into CBDCs, and our banks and cash won't work anymore.
They're gonna
be optimistic on it, but
they're gonna spin the propaganda wheel on it. They're gonna come up with some reason. They tried
pushing out the Fed Now, which is like kind of like how Cash App or Venmo, or like you're checking out on like a Shopify based store. It's like, use Apple Pay or use your card or this or that. They're trying to push to where whatever it is, you just go and use FedNow to pay it. It's like all your money, it goes to FedNow and then it goes to them. And so it's like you're literally, the Federal Reserve is tracking every single little purchase and holding the money and moving it back and forth. compared to more, even though I'm sure there's arms that control everything, but even like a Cash App or a Venmo, even though Venmo's owned by PayPal, but all these different ones, instead it's the Federal Reserve, instead of independent companies working for their own interests, it's the Federal Reserve working for the Fed and in bed with the government's interests, which is pretty scary. If like, imagine if this complex and every apartment complex started saying, oh, well, if you want to pay your rent, you have to pay through FedNow. And then Amazon started doing FedNow, and then Walmart started doing FedNow, and they're rolling out CBDCs, and it's like, oh, you don't even have to carry cash. Just hold your phone up and scan it and use your crypto CBDC bank accounts.
America luckily has that rugged streak. I definitely could see like Canada's going to have some sort of thing.
Because
Canada's done.
All the countries, like the Canadas, the Australias, where it's like, well, it's like during COVID, it's like, you let the government take all the guns.
Yeah.
And that's like in Australia, there's like, you're kind of living in a prison camp because you let the government take all your guns, versus America, our citizens is like one of the biggest military or like militias or whatever. So I think we still have power, but what we've seen with the puppet masters is it's never as black and white as like they try to do this and it fails. They try to do this. It's very
gradual.
They're smart. They're brilliant people. So it's like they're very gradually trying to introduce stuff in. Occasionally that we see failures like with certain aspects of the virus and the medicine, but for the most part, they're very cunning and very deliberate with their stuff.
Have you always thought there was like puppet masters? Like
when I was a kid, I think that, which I'm very grateful
Actually,
for.
Explain what you mean by puppet masters. So, basically, people above us that have more power, control over
power and namely power over other people. That's why they're called puppet masters. So it's like, I'm sure there's levels of it where like there's certain people that control everyone, but then people ride under them, which are controlled by them, but they get to control some people, and it's just
what that reminds me of?
power
Spy
hierarchy.
Kids. Have you ever seen Spy Kids?
Spy
the video
Kids.
game one?
Yeah, I remember.
There's like a puppet master and he's controlling the game, but it's like people think it's just a virtual reality game, but in reality it's like there's more to it and stuff. That's what that reminds me. Because they use puppet masters as
I like puppet masters because it paints I like saying puppet masters compared to the Matrix, but I don't know if there's because like the Illuminati, which is, it's just kind of like what. Okay, actually, we'll circle back to your question because it involves the Illuminati. So I remember when I was a kid, you're asking. I got red pilled pretty quick because I started watching these. It was on YouTube too, because YouTube was more based back then before Google bought it out. But it was like The Truth May Scare You, and it was these kind of surface level, but you learn about Freemasons, the Illuminati, Bohemian Grove, like the symbolism and the rituals and the hand signs and like music and movies and actors and media. So and like I'm a kid, so like even if some of the stuff was exaggerated, I was like. I thought the Illuminati was going to be like a daily problem for me. I was like, oh my gosh, bro, there's the eye, the logo, the eye, and it's like the Illuminati.
This was all on the internet?
Yeah, on YouTube. Like I started coming across.
Because you're 25, right? You're a little younger.
I was raised on YouTube, so it's like I found that stuff.
Because when we had those questions, like back then, that we didn't have the internet to be able to like feed that curiosity. I'm trying to remember like how. I
remember vaguely seeing like something on National Geographic or the History Channel, like a commercial for some conspiracy show about the Illuminati, and I remember just thinking, I was like, all right, whatever.
I feel like the Illuminati, because I was gonna say maybe in like 2020 when I really went down the rabbit holes of like the terrifying shit, like you could argue demonic or evil or morally horrible, and you learn about the Epsteins and like all these different stuff. Once I dived into that, I remember thinking, dude, this shit makes the Illuminati look like the fucking Boy Scouts. Like, I think the Illuminati is just kind of a psyop because, like, they're Freemasons and they have this little club. And, like, yeah, there's masonry and that's part of it. Like, at the higher levels, it's kind of like, like the local neighborhood Masons are like regular dads that probably like, read the Bible and shit. But once you get to a certain level, it's like, it's not the Bible. You're doing weird stuff. There's weird, or like the Skull and Bones that George Bush and Clinton. You don't know about the Skull and Bones?
Oh,
real quick, I'll talk about it. But it was like
remembered mine. Don't let me forget to say when I realized like the whole puppet.
Say it real quick,
stuff.
and then we'll circle back.
It was when I was a kid. It was religion. It was really. Well, I would go to church.
That was the red pill for you.
That was like because
that's the white pill. I think that's what they call like.
Is it
Jesus or whatever? Like Christianity, the white pill, because like
I don't know. I just remember I was a very very curious kid. I was like very like talkative, and I would always have questions. And I remember back then, again, that's when. But whenever I would go to church and stuff, I would ask a lot of questions, and it was really frowned upon because I would like I would question like a lot of stuff that they said.
What denomination is this? Catholic?
Catholic.
Yeah, there you go.
Catholic. So I would question a lot of things as a kid, which I was like, I was actually curious, right? But they would, instead of trying to explain it, like I never had those people that like actually knew how to like talk to me about it. They would just be like, no, be quiet, stop saying stuff like that, like don't question it, just believe. And I was like, so that's when I started kind of like challenging like a lot of beliefs and stuff. So I would say that was like the first moment I remember starting to challenge like this belief system concept, and not just
did it push you away from like Catholicism or Christianity in general? Did it just make you try to learn things on your own?
No, when I was a kid, it did because of that. Because
it's always Catholics too. It's always Catholics that like leave because of the parents and the church and stuff. Like
because
it's less common with
I didn't like
every other denomination.
I didn't like feeling guilty, and whenever I would question things or whenever I would do something wrong, I didn't like the guilt being the thing that was like I would live like super anxious because I was like really like, dang, I better be good or else like I didn't like that. So I think that's what, and also too, whenever I would ask questions, it was like frowned upon. It was like, no, be quiet, just believe it. Like there wasn't no explanation. There wasn't. So that was like which
in turn makes your belief so surface level versus like, I feel like if you truly believe something, you want to try to disprove yourself. Like I'll listen to Christians debate Muslims and stuff because I want to hear the challenges against my faith. So then when I hear the rebuttals or I do my own research, I can further cement my faith. Or if like for some reason I was super wrong about a belief, I find the right perspective or a better perspective.
Yeah, I had similar things like that with the church stuff. I don't think I had it where if I asked a question, it was frowned upon, but the answers I got, it was like I would leave feeling like, yeah, that's not it. Like just like on a gut level, I'd just be like, yeah, that's not it.
What denomination were you?
Lutheran.
Okay.
But we weren't extremely concerned with the denomination, but it would just happen to be Lutheran and pretty much every time. But yeah, like I think, what's interesting about the church stuff, I was been thinking a lot about this. The church is sort of a matrix.
I was going to go down this matrix when you think about it.
If we could go down this rabbit hole, I mean, like,
now we can.
It's not like it's sort of like the Freemasons and everything. It's not like the average person is, but it's like they're not even. I feel like there's like a Tyler the Creator line he had in a song. He said, "That ain't your religion. You're just following your mother." Right. And I was like, that's, because most people just have the religion of their parents and they stay in the same denomination. They don't really quite, and they're just going with it and like reinforcing their own belief system. Even when they go to like, oh, I'm going to go study more. It's like we're studying from the perspective of the religion. Yeah. So it's just, in a way, a matrix is like a thought construct. It's like passed down. The biggest matrix is the programming you put into the mind of the next generation.
See, that's why I was at when I asked you guys like what else you called it. I've called it like different things like through my lifetime. Like there's matrix, there's like a game, right? The game, and then there's a cage, right? So the cage was the very first term I came up with.
I think that was mine too, yeah.
And once I realized, because you realize you're in a cage, it's and the only way you can get out of the cage, which most things like religion and all that kind of stuff is. The only way to break away is you have to kind of like overcome some fears, right? So in religion, like for example, me as a kid, I had to be willing to piss off the adults by like saying the stuff I thought or the questions I had, but I could have chose the route of just not like being too scared to say anything, that I just shut up and then just said yes and shook my head. So I think for me, like I always call it a cage, and I think there's like levels or bigger cages. So like you escape a small cage.
It's like a Russian doll of cages.
Yeah, so you keep like escaping the new cage and it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think that's how I see it, like with levels. And with each cage that you escape, you have to overcome like some kind of a fear. And to like really go back, for example, I think the first cage I ever escaped, like actually like I felt like escape was when I discovered fitness. And that was like the whole like,
the health matrix. You break health matrix. Dude, health is literally a matrix because you think about, all of big food and big pharma are in bed and they make you sick and they treat it, but they'll never cure it. It's like
it's like you see all these people that complain about their energy and how they're getting old, and everyone's telling you they're getting old. All the adults that aren't old, and you're just like, it doesn't make any sense. Like I met someone who's 20 or 30 at the time, and they were like had so much energy, they were doing all this stuff, and then I would meet somebody else that was using it as an excuse. And I'm like, no, that doesn't make sense. So like that's when I realized that if you actually like put in the work and eat healthier, you have more energy, you have more time, you have more like focus, you have more discipline. And that was like I would say that's the first cage that I really escaped from, that I wanted. Whenever you escape a cage, like I feel like you want to tell everybody else like, yo, you're in a cage too. This is how you get out of it. So then that's how I became like a personal trainer. I wanted to show everybody like they're actually trapped. Like you don't have to accept getting off of work, 9-hour shift later and being too tired to like focus on your kids and you're just not even present, like little things like that.
And then before you know it, you're calling people NPCs and asking them what color their
Dude,
Bugatti
exactly.
is.
Do you guys remember the very first cage that you escaped from, or Matrix, or whatever you want to call it?
Simultaneously, probably the political and religious one. But I was programmed, I was pre-prepared to, I guess, question things. I didn't have anybody telling me I couldn't question things. And I grew up, I was unvaccinated. I was vegetarian the first 12 years of my life. I had this
what?
Yeah.
Holy shit.
I have this name that's like I think I'm the only person in the country with the name Keefe, actually. I looked it up a long time ago. And like there's a few other things that are just different. So like I grew up with this kind of mentality of like, oh, like I'm just kind of not different in like I feel bad about myself. I guess a comfort with thinking independently about things.
Willingness to go against the grain.
Yeah.
So you were like a curious kid.
Yeah, and that got instilled in me by my parents. So like I think that was a good thing they did. They didn't tell me I couldn't question things, and like they were vegetarian even after I stopped. Like that was my decision. It's not like they made me
so they're still to this day vegetarian,
sort of, but they were vegetarian my entire childhood, but I stopped when I was like 12 years old.
Why'd you stop?
I think maybe
you saw like a fire ass steak and you're like,
honestly,
what am I doing?
It might have been like partial peer pressure at the time, to be honest, and then partially just like, I don't know. I just didn't want that to be the thing I lived my life around. I was born into it. It was the Matrix I escaped, I guess. Nah.
Dude, I distinctly remember, because you brought up the flu vaccine. I remember being in a hospital, like in the room when my mom was getting her flu vaccine. I remember there was this nurse, and my mom told her, yeah, he doesn't want to get it. And she like flipped out. Like, what? And I was 10. I was like 10 years old.
But my textbooks say you need to get it or you'll die.
Yeah, she's like, are you dumb?
By Big Pharma.
She literally got so angry, and like you could tell this was like something she really like felt strongly about, because I was just a 10-year-old kid. And I was like, I don't know near as much as you do, but
I'm gonna pass.
I'm gonna pass because I don't know you.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about this. Like, I'm so uneducated about the flu vaccine. I'm like, what if? So like, let me get educated first, and then I'll make my own. So I've never got a flu vaccine, but I remember she was so pissed. I was like, that's a bad experience. Like, now it makes me not want to have the flu vaccine even more. She wound up literally like I felt like she was right there ready to choke me.
I don't want to get in that Matrix.
Yeah. I don't know. She was very passionate about the flu vaccine, and I was 10 years old, and my mom was like, oh shoot.
So circling back to the asking questions about Catholicism, now where are you at with that? Like, did that just kind of turn you off from faith in general?
No, I think.
Just make you
have you guys ever seen the movie? I don't know what it's called, but it was like, it's an old movie where nobody the Matrix. No, it was an old movie where nobody was able to lie. Like everybody, there was like the world. Nobody
was it Liar Liar?
I think it might be Liar Liar, where nobody lied. Everyone always told the truth. Like, lying didn't even exist. And in the movie, one person finally lies for the first time. Like, there was like a flip where they make the first lie because they were like super broke or something.
I've seen I haven't seen, I don't know if I think Liar Liar was like the opposite, was about a guy who couldn't lie in like the regular world, but I've seen a clip of that movie where it's
no, I'm talking about a different one. Yeah. And this one, nobody like ever lied, right? So it was like before lying was invented. And then one person gets in a situation to where they're so broke and they're at the bank and they make the first lie, like something like
I've seen that.
And then it turns into, because nobody lies, he was like, no, I think I actually have like $1,000 in the bank account. And they're like, oh, that must be a mistake. So they gave him $1,000, like, again, because everyone's honest, nobody lies. And then he starts using it to his convenience. And then at one point, I think he was like trying to get with this girl, and she would not look like his way or whatever. And then he made up a lie about it's going to be the end of the world, and we have to like, unless we can save the end of the world if we like have sex right now. And the girl's like, what? Okay, do we have time to go to like a hotel, or do we have to do it right here? And it was like, and he used it, but little by little, he started saying things about like, I don't know, he would make something up and there was no proof. Like, he would make something and he could tell that nobody was going to believe him. So he had to be like, it was a voice. And they were like, what, a voice? Right? Everyone believed him because nobody lies except for this guy. He's like, yeah, no, it was a voice that is telling me to tell you guys. And he became a prophet, right? So it was like the first prophet. So it turned into this whole thing where everybody was worshiping him because he was the
I know
prophet.
some religions like that.
Yeah, like and then everybody was like again, he used it to his advantage, and he would cater that religion that he invented in that movie depending on what he wanted and what pleased him, you know, whether it was girls or whatever. But so he just built his own religion, and then it turned into, because he was the only person that was able to lie. But anyways, the whole point of that movie was I more or less went the route of, okay, why are there so many religions? I think a lot of people do this, is why are there so many? If this is true, then why does this religion exist? Why does this religion exist? Why is there Christianity, Catholicism, like all these beliefs? So then I started questioning more, and at the end of the day, I think it's just more, I started going the route of like searching for the truth, not necessarily like believing one specific religion. It was more, I'm gonna let my curiosity just kind of like do its thing until, you know, and just keep searching for what is true, you know, because there's so much still I don't know.
Okay, so that's where you would say you're at right now.
Yeah, that's where I say I'm at.
There's an ad on our timer on the TV. I'm skipping it.
I know, it's like
so. If that's where you're at right now, I guess I'll push. I'm not push back, but like give my perspective, is that I do agree. It happens a lot with Catholicism. That's why we see so many kids leave, because they're overbearing parents and the teachers. And there's some other religions that are very much like this, even more than Christianity. But we see it's very teacher centric, where instead of diving into the book and history and like developing your own experiences and perspectives on it, there's a teacher that's like, I am the middleman between the word. Like, you can read the word, but I am the middleman, the interpreter between the word and you. And my teacher taught me this, and then his teacher taught me this. So we'll see religions where they say and preach and say certain things, but then you visit their book and you're like, you don't really talk about this, or this kind of goes against what you were saying. It's because it's so teacher based. And I think Christianity is so different. And like you were saying, it's the what Tyler the Creator said, like the religion of your parents. And that's why I would argue, as a Christian, I would argue that most people aren't truly Christian. They don't truly believe. It's just kind of they're in like a matrix or whatever. And we see that represented in the West, which we can segue into that topic in a little bit. But on the same side, I think we're all like spiritual still though. So we still do think there's something more. We still do think there's a God or like spirituality, like
I think I'm still like in the phase where
agnostic, maybe, like you're like maybe.
I'm more like, it doesn't hurt, right? If it's true or if it's not true, like whatever it is, like I feel like as long as if it brings, I guess, good to the world, like to your life, like in a genuine way, then I'm like, okay, do you have to believe it's true, or can you just believe it's true and because it doesn't hurt, right? It can only help. And if you're wrong, then
that's
you're
like
wrong.
the Jordan Peterson. I think Jordan Peterson is more Christian now than he was, but his original argument was, and why the West, like going with that point, why the West was so, like, maybe not now, of course, but when they had the base of Christianity just so morally correct from my objective perspective. But it's because Peterson's like, it's better, and he would, like, when he debates Sam Harris and like all the other atheist scholars, he would say it's better to behave as if God exists versus behaving as if he doesn't. Even if, you know, maybe it's not the exact truth or there's these different beliefs, it's better to behave as if God exists because it instills base morals in everyone versus a world where everyone gets to define their own morals and, of course, their ego and like if you believe in evil, but like evil will corrupt them and they'll create very warped perspectives on the reality of morality.
When I asked like people who were you know, like people who like really try to like push their religion stuff, but like people who they do it right, and I'll ask them like, okay, what if you find out like it's not true? Then they always say the same answer.
Impossible.
No. These are the ones I'm saying like are doing it right. They're like, then I was wrong.
Then what?
Then I was wrong.
Yeah, and I think
it's like
that's what everyone should say about everything. That's the thing. Is like, if I came with some sort of irrefutable, which I believe it's impossible. I believe my faith completely, but if like there was some sort of irrefutable evidence of like, I don't know, whatever, like a Buddhist god, like all of a sudden touches down. But even then I'd be skeptical. I'm like, this is a psyop. So it's like hard, but I that's like I was saying, like challenge your own beliefs. I think part of growth in terms of not even religion, but everything in life, your perspectives on the world, your perspectives on yourself, for your entire life, you need to be challenging all of your beliefs. Otherwise you're not going to grow and your perspectives aren't going to evolve.
That's basically, what's that quote? Like, if you stand for nothing, what is it? If you don't like, you have to stand for something.
If you stand for nothing, you die for. If you stand for nothing, you die for nothing. I think that's kind of the point of it.
It's something like that.
Right.
It's like if you have your own belief, if you create your own belief systems, then like versus if you don't have a set of belief system, then someone else is gonna create them for you, right? So like it's similar to the if you write your own story, choose your path, versus if you don't, then someone else is gonna choose your path for you, kind of thing. I think that's like similar to what we're basically saying is like if you're the fact that you're able to form your own belief systems is like very advantageous, because if you don't, like a lot of people don't, they just kind of go with the flow, then they're controlled by everybody else.
The hive mind.
So we go back to like the puppet master
I was
stuff.
gonna say, circling back to the Matrix, is it even actually possible to escape the Matrix? Because I don't think we can really completely create our value systems. Everything's built upon something else. It was I use Nietzsche quotes on this podcast, I guess. Like he said, everybody's the mouthpiece of a dead philosopher. So like we're just recycling ideas.
100%. Like we adapt minor. The lens changes. Like we have our own lens of it, and that's why maybe your content connects to a certain type of person, your content, my content. But if you boil it down, like there's a lot of core truths that we all believe in, but our lenses, we get to share it with different people that attach. But I agree.
Well, you even think about
maybe this is why we were talking about evil and good, right? How like genuine evil exists, but maybe this is why, right? When people realize that you can never escape the Matrix, then the only way to actually escape it is by just getting rid of humanity, just destroying the world.
People
or leaving or yourself, I guess. Like,
well, that's what the
dark side is like the nihilistic people.
But then the Matrix still exists, though. You know what I mean?
The Columbine killers thought that life was so unjustifiably evil and wretched that it was worth just destroying it all.
That's what I'm saying. So like once you realize that there's no escape, I think that's why people make those decisions to like just massacre and like just like again stop living and like all that stuff, because they realize that it's almost like if you think that way and you have that perspective, then there's no point in life, right? So you might as well just go mayhem, cause chaos, because there's no point, right? At the end of the day, you're still going to always be stuck in this cage matrix that nobody can ever escape from. Yeah, that's so why I'm like, that's where evil comes from, right there. There you go.
I don't think I could make the call of like if you can escape the Matrix or not, because like you explained how it's such a broad topic, it can apply to so many different things. So it's like, can you escape this specific Matrix? Yes. What about this one? Probably not. You know,
then it's more like a question like how we were saying. There's always another cage. Is there a last cage?
The last cage would be if you like transcended your ego, I think, and that's when you've left the cage altogether, I suppose.
Yeah, the self, I guess, which I'm
self-actualization.
Yeah, the self. There's different takes on it, because there's like the Buddhist ego view of if you the equation of happiness equals 1 over ego. So it's like, let's say your ego was high, so it's like 1 over a million is a very small amount, very small happiness. But let's say you dissolve your ego to like 1 over 2. That's a lot of happiness. 1 over 0 is infinite happiness. So there's some people that have that perspective. However, there's some people more like Jung that pushes like on the Carl Jung perspective compared to the Buddhist of like the true self. Like the self is real, but it's not like really real. Like it's not that serious. Your ego is not that representative of reality. But there's still a you, there's still self-actualization, there's still individualism, which I like to lean towards. I like to lean towards the idea of like, you're an individual, you need to like meditate, you need to break out of your ego in order to control it, but I'm not sure if true ego dissolving is like possible. I'm not sure if it's like, I don't know.
I don't know.
I really don't know if that's a possible thing, but I do understand that Matrix. And I would say, for me, at least the final cage, but it's not even a cage, but I would say like the core truth of like the inescapable realities would be going back to like whatever your religion is. So it's like at the end of the day, there's all these things, but if I got rid of all this stuff and tore it down, I'm still tied to this book and these certain beliefs and these certain moral philosophies, regardless of anything else, because it's my belief. And if you believe in like an afterlife, it dictates where I'm going after my time on this dimension, you know?
Tommy Shelby from Peaky Blinders, he said, all religion is a foolish answer to a foolish question. Sometimes I think that's kind of true. And like everybody's like, what happens after we die, or what's the point of all this? It's like, well, here you are, like it or not, you're in. This is the matrix that you're in. You might, and like, there's honestly a lot of cool shit going on. You might as well just go enjoy
for
the
real.
game.
Yeah.
Like, there's no reason to have a negative outlook on it. Yeah, like the matrix, like the human constructed matrices, I think you can break out of them. But honestly, even with that, I don't really want to break out of them. Like I said, I don't want to go live up in the mountains by myself.
No.
I want to learn how to play the game and skirt the system the way, like, do it the way I want to do it. I don't want to be stuck in situations where it's being used against me, but I don't want to escape the matrix entirely.
Yeah, and that's the same. I'm sure that's all of our perspectives. We like the idea of the game and the infinite game that we want to keep playing.
Yeah.
But also, I have no ill will against people who do decide to opt out and go meditate in the mountains or whatever. Because like,
Yeah, I don't
as someone,
give a
I dabble
fuck.
with meditation.
Yeah.
Like, I can understand that to an extent, and your lens is different than mine, and maybe you are reaching a different actualization,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe that's going to get you to an actualization that'll bring you into another game or something like that. So I don't want to make it too dogmatic one way or another, at least in terms of that.
I think all of this is sort of, I believe in a creative design for everything. So I think some people, maybe they're meant to go to the mountains, and maybe some people are meant to be school teachers, and some people are meant to be multimillionaires. And like, I was going to make this point a while back when we were talking about religion. One of the matrices that I think the religion puts people in is this idea that people, that being wealthy is somehow bad. Yet
Yeah.
every church has their fucking handout like this. One
Yeah.
donations. The Catholic Church is one of the richest institutions in the world. You know, I mean,
That's
the
another
Vatican
matrix I
City.
broke out of.
The Vatican
The
City
Vatican
is
City
fucking.
and the popes are definitely in a grander matrix. If
Oh,
you dive into
yeah.
that. That's not Christianity. You know, if I as a Christian, I'm gonna say that's not Christianity when you go into like the stuff they be doing.
But I would just say, like, the point is, there's nothing wrong with money, and some people are meant to make a lot of money. I think,
Yeah.
like, and it's like, are you doing it for your ego, or is it kind of your destiny? And I think everybody's kind of got that. It's like maybe we talked about this in the last episode, but that circumambulation.
Yeah.
When you're going to find the center of who you are, and maybe part of your journey is you're going to go make a bunch of money, or maybe your journey is you go up in the mountains. So, I don't have a problem with anybody doing what they want within the matrix, but I suppose the broadest matrix is the laws of the universe, the laws of nature, the whatever the deepest substructure of all of this really is. You can't really escape that. You might as well just play within the game. Yeah, God or the universe, whatever you want to call it, creation, source, I don't know. However you want to define that, you can't really escape that. You can maybe figure out that you're part of it and enjoy it, and everybody can do what they want within it. I don't know.
So since we all have slightly different views, but do we think we could all agree? Like, is there a true, not objective, not this or that, like a true morality good, like a good force, a good positive force, like light? And is there a true evil and darkness?
Yeah.
Versus like some people argue it's all human created, which I just would strongly disagree with. I think there's truly a good and evil. I think evil is prominent on this earth. I mean, my perspective on things when it comes to, like, we talk about the evils in the world, it's kind of like Tate. I said in the last podcast, but we didn't really, this is a better conversation to be had, how his argument of why he chooses Islam is, well, just look at the West. Like, look, that porn star says she's Christian. Like, oh, they're Christian, but they're doing this. And it's like any actual Christian, which is, the official number is 2.2 billion, but it's probably much lesser than that in terms of people who actually believe this actually happened, this book is actually true, because their lives would reflect that. Even, you're still going to fault, you're still going to sin, but your life is going to reflect you definitely do believe that there's something after, that you were saved, that you believe in this God or whatever. Versus a lot of people are just like, it's a place they go on Sundays because their parents bring them, and it gives them, they like the idea that when they die they go somewhere and they attach to that, but it's just cope, because they don't, deep down they truly, like, gun to their head, they would not accept it. They would say, no, it's not true, to like save their life on this dimension. But circling back to, I think the reason for a lot of why the world seems, especially the West, but the world in general, well, no, actually there's plenty of evil, seems so evil as it is how I see it. I think in the Bible, one of the biggest things God is all about is free will. And that's like his thing, like especially once he got into the New Testament, he was all about free will. That's why, like, in theory, that would be why we don't have the burning bushes anymore, or angels don't reveal themselves and all of this. But that's God's belief. In terms of evil, if you believe in a Satan or demons or whatever, they have free reign somewhat. I think there's a verse that says that Satan is either the king or the prince of earth, because he gets to roam and corrupt. And, you know, if you go down rabbit holes of conspiracy stuff, I've seen things where I'm like, I refuse to believe that this is just a human that decided to do this with all the money, all the power. They still decided to do this because humanity has the potential of evil, but I think there has to be a force, like a pushing factor, just as there is for good. So like I do believe in like true good and true evil, and I do think the world, like we're witnessing like a spiritual warfare.
Well, Napoleon Hill said in the Outwitting the Devil book that the devil's just like that energy of negative energy. I think that's probably true because you're either motivated by light or dark.
Right.
And
so is that man-made though?
No, it's
Okay.
beyond that. It's
Okay.
something bigger
So it's
than
still
just
kind
the
of woo-
physical.
okay, like on the woo-wee spiritual,
I
okay.
think it's like I think it's beyond religions. I think religions are a gateway to these things, but I think
Right.
it's bigger than that, and that's why I think there's plenty of people in every religion who are driven by the dark more.
Yeah,
and then there's
100%.
I think there's probably atheists who are driven more by the light. They just have an intrinsic sense of good of things.
Right.
And that's like your attitude that you take to things. I was thinking about this the other day, the difference between cultural morality and true morality, sort of, or like maybe what's culturally right and wrong versus what's morally right and wrong.
And we see cultural morality change with the times quite a bit.
Well, I was thinking even as an example, like pedophilia to me is just a moral wrong. It's just obvious. Like everybody who's not getting programmed constantly can look at this and be like, that's not right.
Yeah.
I think the transgender thing is another one of those things that it just strikes you as unhuman. Like something is just wrong with that. Whereas I think even something maybe as controversial as saying like having multiple girlfriends or wives, that's like a more Western thing. Like even King David in the Bible, I think he had 8 wives.
Yeah.
And I think an interesting point about that is God actually didn't get mad at David until he went and took Bathsheba, who was the other man's wife already, and had him killed. Which I think is a point about cultural morality, which is monogamy versus
that's like
true
the church,
morality.
that's church instilled morality.
Yeah.
Not going straight to like a creator or a textbook, because obviously God would know that not every guy can have 10 wives, but obviously God also knows that, well, that guy did all of this in his life and this happened and he treats them well and it all works out. And it's like, that's like, why would that be a sin?
Yeah.
Everyone's happy. It benefits everyone.
Yeah.
Why, like that? It doesn't make sense for that to be a moral sin, but
it's
it makes
a
sense
morally
to be a cultural
wrong
taboo.
but it's morally wrong to actually go take another man's wife
exactly.
and to break up that, which I think is an interesting. I think that's kind of like the good versus evil, because sometimes I'll look at people and they're doing things that some people think are wrong, like Andrew Tate, right? By so many like typical rules, he's not a good person, right? He had the cam girl thing when he was coming up. He talks about the multiple wives and all those kinds of ideas, and so a lot of people who I think are dogmatically religious are very opposed to him. But I'm like, it's hard for me to look at it and think this guy's not on the side of the light. Like I just, with how much they attack him so ruthlessly, the people that we do all seem to consider to be agents of the evil side or whatever, right?
The Matrix has sent their agents.
Yeah, like with how much those kinds of people, the same people who are making videos twerking on the devil or dressing up like Satan for the Grammys, like those are the people attacking him, makes me think like, okay, maybe he doesn't entirely agree with your religion, but clearly he's on the side of the light. And Trump's another...
Yeah, I was gonna say I would agree. Like even though I obviously would disagree with Tate on his like specific religion like, choice and his viewpoints, just because of course I have one that's maybe similar in some ways but different. I would say that like he as a whole was like a net positive, and morality. He seems to be a good guy. Like there's any skeletons in his closet are like so minor and fabricated by the media that it's like you can't really argue that like this guy is evil. Like if we're using terms of true good and true evil, this guy is not true evil whatsoever, and his output on people has been true good in a lot of aspects.
Yeah, I think God uses people who aren't perfect, because nobody's perfect, but because like Trump's another one. Trump gets a huge pass from the conservatives in America because they just like his politics, but like he's got like he was definitely had plenty of affairs on his wife. I mean, the Billy Bush tape that came out, like he was clearly talking about having affairs in the thing. He's not exactly a perfect person, but I think something about him is being used in a positive light. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but he gives me that vibe. It's like
no, I would
under
agree.
it all.
I think they all have handlers, and that's just how it is. Like every president will have handlers, and he has handlers that are looking at interests that may not be in line with moral good. It may be corruption, but in a lot of ways, his outputs I think if you boil them down to his core beliefs, they're like on the spectrum. It's the spectrum of good versus the spectrum of evil. Like he's never done anything where I'm like, oh, this guy's an agent of the devil or he's like evil. Like no.
Under it all, what's your guiding like thing? Is it like evil or light? I've really started to be aware of that like people can be really even, they can be doing horrible things and still actually be good people, but because you can be so lost in your own ego. I think it might have even been in the Bible where it was saying all sin was ignorance. Like if you knew the truth, you wouldn't sin.
Yeah.
And so it's like people, I mean, the idea in the Bible, it says like you turn the other cheek. It's like, I'm not turning the other cheek if somebody smacks me in the face, right? Like I'm not on that Jesus consciousness level yet, you know? So like there's levels like, even to positive. Should we even strive
to be like that?
Yeah,
though?
Like there's levels to positive. And it's like, what's the, like there's like an underlying value system. Like, I mean, like Godfather, for example, like these mafia people, like they're like killers, but they've got this moral code underneath it.
They're like family guys.
Yeah, like family guys. And like they apparently in like a lot of places they won't let like hard drugs in the city. Like that was like the whole plot of The Godfather was Don Corleone did not want drugs in the streets pretty much. So he's like a killer, but he's like got a conscience somehow. There's like a and the more we learn about how much of a scam most of the world is, you realize that's okay because like America acts like we have a right to kill everybody that we want to kill. Like we'll go to war with somebody. Oh, we can just blow the whole Middle East up in some moral war. It's like no, we're just doing it because we want the oil. So everybody's got their own interests in this idea that we're the righteous people. It's like I think was it Carl Jung who said good and evils across every human heart? It's like we've all got that ability to do right and wrong. It's like what's the guiding light underneath it, I think.
Yeah, and I would say on the flip side, like we talk about, we see people who objectively like do bad things, but we feel like if we boil them down, there's good in their heart.
Yeah.
On the opposite side, we see people who are masked in like the civil servants, like more liberalists, like I want to help people benefit. Everyone should be whatever. Yeah. But then we look at them and we're like, or even
underlying
certain presidents. I would argue most presidents, especially recently, but certain presidents where they were like the most charismatic, like they seemed great, morally good. Some of them even say they were Christian, and then you look at what they really do. You boil it down, and you're like, you are evil. Like you are truly evil. As much as you try to put on this white suit, there's black underneath. Mm-hmm. Not talking about race.
Yeah.
That's funny. I don't know. I feel, because you said the good and evil thing, but I don't know. I would still not probably go that route. I still think like I'm still in the middle. I'm not even sure. Like I think a lot of it
could be still just human like construct, and
I think,
or there could be a mystical force.
I think it's like, okay, so not the evil and the good thing, but like I'm still kind of like undecided. I think it's closer to, have you guys, like, it's like pain and pleasure, right? Like how people just function, or just beings function on pain and pleasure. And I think we're born not necessarily bad, but we're born just seeking pleasure, and then we're just kind of like molded into, I think it's kind of like if you get into evolution, I think if we didn't
say biologically wired to chase, like, you could argue like some ways of getting cheap dopamine are like evil in certain aspects, or bad, but we're still wired to do that due to like our ancestors and the world they lived in, and we still have those mental systems that don't suit us in the modern world.
I think any species in general, like if they don't have like that, the ones that were able to kind of evolve the evil and good are the ones that last the longest. But again, like let's say it didn't exist. Let's say the world was just like that, right? Where it's just everything goes. The world
is just Big Bang.
It's just pleasure for everybody, right? Like avoid pain, just seek pleasure. Then we would just be extinct, like extinct. Like humans wouldn't even exist.
We would end like that, yeah.
So like I think the evolution has kind of evolved us to have that, like to operate with some kind of a rule, and because we operated on those rules, that's why we lasted so long. Because again, we were able to kind of like evolve, if that makes sense. So like that's like I feel
think morality is an evolved construct?
It could be. I'm not saying I'm for sure, that. But like I do think that that's like that's why I'm saying I'm like in the middle. I wouldn't say I think we had to.
You're agnostic on the topic of morality.
Yeah, like I wouldn't say I think we could. There's a good chance we could create evil and good, and that's why we've been around so long. Because if we didn't do that, then we would. Again, there'd be another species that would be humans instead of us, I think it's the same thing with like animals, right? If you have animals that last the longest, typically it's because, right, they work together for whatever reason, right? When you're born as like a little lion, for example, like you're not, again, you just go after what you want, but then when you have someone who feeds you it gives you pleasure. So you're like, hey, this person's feeding me. I should like kind of like do what they say. So they keep feeding me, and then like that slowly builds into what we call like attachment, connection, love, emotions, like all that kind of stuff, and then that turns into what we have today, again, good and evil and morals and like all that kind of stuff.
So you're saying like there's a chance that in reality it's all just chemicals in our brain and how
I think that's a good argument. Like when you're
rationalizing our biology.
I was reading the book Relentless, Tim Grover, and he talks about how everyone's born bad and they're taught to be good. How everybody's born just going after what they want, again, seeking pleasure, avoiding pain, but we're kind of like taught to, to relent instead of being relentless. Right. So I think that's really good because it makes sense. And so that's why I'm still undecided about all
the biology definitely plays a part in it. I'm actually,
it's probably more of reality, I would say. As I'm spiritual, I believe in good and evil, but I think a lot of there's like good and evil, but then a lot of the in between is just biology. Like, is TikTok the devil?
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's just dopamine and we're biologically wired and it's for profit. And of course, China wants to gain power and influence over us, and it's like I don't think there's the devil puppeteering TikTok, you know?
Yeah, that's almost like in the middle of the like good people can do bad things, bad people can do good things, and that's not even like TikTok's not some morally good or bad thing. It just kind of is a thing, and it can be used as a tool for good if you want to build a brand and get rich off it, or it can be used to completely self-destruct you, because there's probably good people who are I'm sure there are, like good people who are very compulsive about something like TikTok. And then I think Mark Zuckerberg doesn't even let his kids have a Facebook because he knows it's no good. And like, we think of him as an agent of the Matrix, right? It's but I actually consider myself kind of like a evolutionary religious person. Like, I think evolution is the creative process of something divine, because it's I don't believe in the randomness because it's too random. And so what you were talking about, I do believe, like morality is an evolved thing, but it's intelligently evolved. So like, it's kind of like the founders of this country really believed in natural law, and they thought that morality was self-evident sort of in the way that nature operated, and that the best way to kind of behave was to operate in accordance with nature, and then you would operate correctly. I think that's ties into it. If nature, if we were I was kind of touching on it earlier, how it's all underneath kind of God or the source or whatever, well, then nature springs out of that. So there's a self-evident order to it all, and that would be the moral code, and we would be in alignment with it, or we wouldn't even be here today.
Right. So taking out the middle ground where we're like unsure, you know, like the biological goods and whatnot, would you still say, in terms of if we're saying in a scenario where there is a creator and there is a good and there is an evil, these could be, you know, if you believe in like Satan, like the fallen angel, and he's in hell or whatever, and he's puppeteering demons or whatnot, would you say that there is a spiritual warfare going on, like in the current world and in reality? Would you say it's all the middle ground for the most part?
It's all like just sort of tilting, kind of like so there's like a tug from good and a tug from evil, I think, going from the extremes, and everybody's kind of happening within the middle. And you can see that people use everything as a tool for good or a tool for bad. Like all the things are kind of like pieces on the board, sort of like people are even pieces that we're like autonomous pieces with our own free will. But I mean, you can use a gun to do a school shooting or to kill an animal and feed your family. You can use money to create financial freedom, empower people, feed people, do all kinds of things, or you can use it as a tool for power, right? So I think it's all people's consciousness using the things around them, and their consciousness is creating their aims and their perspectives on things and how they're going to choose to use things. So if your goals in life are like you want to get rich, you're having a conversation with somebody, maybe they talk about a product, and because of your perspective, your goals, your values, the product they talk about, maybe you look at it, you're like, maybe I could make another product similar to that or something like that. If you're somebody who's very pleasure driven, then somebody talks about a product, you're like, I want that product because it'll make me feel good too, right? So everything is just a tool based on us and our goals and our values, which is why it's super important that everybody understand what they're going after and what their motives are, I think. and making sure you're being driven by positive forces, because everything is just going to be a byproduct of that.
Ooh, it's
Yeah.
like I remember when I was in like the philosophy class and we were talking about pain and pleasure, which that's one of the most fascinating things that I like to talk about. But it's like, for example, like cheating, right, in relationships. Like if you have a girlfriend, like, do you not cheat because you're afraid of hurting her, or you're afraid of the pain you're gonna feel for hurting her? So is it like essentially you don't cheat out of like selfishness?
Everything is a selfish decision.
Exactly.
I believe that. Yeah.
Exactly. So like,
even if you go to, like, let's say, like, everything you did because you wanted to do it. You go to even if you go to a funeral, you went to the funeral. Maybe you didn't want to go to the funeral, but you'd rather go to the funeral than have to feel guilty about not going to the funeral.
Exactly. And that's where like we get back to the pain and pleasure thing, right? Because it's more painful for you to feel that guilt, so you choose the route of pleasure.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth. So that's another reason why I would say,
Like a 7-Eleven, like I gave that guy money, and like, yeah, I gave him money, help him out, but in reality, I knew that it would help reinstill my identity as a good person. You know, like like not at the time, but subconsciously, if I reflected on, like, yeah, that makes me feel good, and it helps me cement my identity as someone that does good things morally. You know. So do you think, like, back to the spiritual warfare, when you see things like satanic imagery in movies and in music and in media, or you see, you know, these elites that do these really, like a Bohemian Grove where they're doing a mock sacrifice and like ceremonies around Moloch, which the name Moloch is from the Bible, but the owl god, I don't think Moloch's an owl in the Bible. Or like all these, you know, weird things at the Grammys, weird things at like Super Bowls, where it's like very in line with like a satanic ritual, things like that. Do you see that, and do you think there's like kind of a clear hand of evil kind of like manipulating and puppeteering, or do you think maybe they're trying to tap into that energy? Or
I think go ahead.
I was gonna say, well, sometimes I think when we talk about it in these terms, it gets people to think that like there's somebody back here like, whoa, like the devil is like doing. It's the energy that they've chosen to embody.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to like.
And
get
that
to.
motivates their
And they might have
action.
realized that.
And they get something out of it. You
Yeah,
know?
it's not like the devil's like literally being like, yo, do this and then do this, but they're realizing like maybe they believe in evil, or like I say the devil, but I'm just trying to like personify evil so we can like describe it better. But perhaps they're like, oh, well, when I do these things, it gives me more of this dark energy, or they might just see it as true energy or the truth or whatever, and it pushes me more into like success and all these things and power.
Yeah.
Compared to like the devil like walking up and be like, yo, I need you to do this, this, and this. It's like, all right, boss. You know, and they're like, "Wah," like you were saying.
Yeah. I think it's like that they're just acting out of an energy that they've adopted, and that's why I think I actually was like thinking about this morning. I was like, I pray that I achieve everything I want to achieve in life, but I don't lose my soul in the process.
Yeah.
I really think that's because I think a lot of these people were willing to give that up to get what they wanted.
Yeah, and you see, especially for some reason in the hip hop, but so many artists will like kind of leave they'll kind of pop off a little bit and then leave the industry, and they'll go on like podcasts and interviews and be like, I just didn't want to give up my soul. And of course, a lot of it's metaphorical for like selling your soul to a label that will have full, like they own you for the rest of your life, and they take a huge percentage. But then there's others who in recent, I don't know the names, but they'll come on and they'll say some, I don't know if you've seen, they'll say some wild stuff about, yeah, they wanted me to do this really sus stuff, or like they were trying to compromise me and get blackmail on me, or like they're doing like these ritualistic things. Like they'll come out and say that, and they'll say, especially in like the hip hop industry for some reason, how prominent that is.
Well, look at what the people, I mean, when Kanye even came out, like a lot of them, like nobody really jumped on like entirely with what he was saying about a lot of the things, but nobody really was like, nah, he's wrong about the labels. Like everybody knew that was like some bad stuff going on in there. I think that's one of the worst industries for it.
And then before that, like where they talk about them boys, before that, when he just started coming out with like Christian music and gospel and starting to talk about Jesus more, and he would come out with perhaps he's literally said, he's like, that you sign contracts where you're not allowed to say Jesus, like this and that. Like no one really pushed back, because that seems to be the reality of like, they're not tapping into the good. You're not allowed to acknowledge the good. You know, there's Christian rappers, but they're on Christian labels and they're more niche and like kind of corny at times. But all these true artists, and a lot of them like deliberately say things that you could say evil. Like for example, when Lil Uzi Vert was at his concert, and you can find this video online, and he's like, and Lil Uzi Vert, of course, is known for like dark imagery, same with like the Trippie Reds, the Juice WRLDs, all those types of rappers. But he says to his crowd, like, you're all going to hell. Like, I'm just like, there's nothing you can do about it. You're already here. You're singing my music. You listen to the songs. Like, you're going to hell. And it's like, sure, he could be like trolling or just kind of, you know, he just likes the aesthetic of Satanism and all that. But it's just weirdly a pattern in music, and especially hip hop, is it's just dark energies. And we see that reflect with how hip hop influences people. If you want to pull it out of spiritual and go into like practical, of like, you know, certain demographics that are very influenced by hip hop, we see like bad things happen in the communities because of the dark energies that they're adopting. I mean, that's why I listen to music less now than I used to, because I feel like whatever you're listening to, like the vibrations or the energy or whatever, the subconscious, because the words are in your head, like you're pulling energies and ideas and perspectives out of that. And I think a lot of it is like nefarious and bad and low vibration, whatever. I don't want to get too wooey about it, but I do think, like, for example, I used to listen to like Suicide Boys a lot, and then I was like, yeah, this gets me going for the workouts, but I'm like, this is so fucking negative. Like I should not be listening to this just in the car chilling and stuff, because even if I don't notice it, like I'll notice a slight subconscious film over my perspective, a film over my lens that paints things in a darker way, if that makes sense.
I think that's where it depends on you knowing your purpose, right? Because if you know your purpose, then you can cater what you listen to. You choose what you listen to that's actually going to help you achieve the purpose. You watch movies that are going to actually like help you, or like you subscribe to certain YouTube channels because you know they're like going to be beneficial for your purpose. Yeah,
just catering your intake of content. I mean, just in terms of self-improvement, I think that's what everyone should do. Like, we talk about, like, yeah, you probably shouldn't watch Mr. Beast all day, every day, or The Sidemen, you know? You probably should listen to, like, a podcast or an audiobook here and there. And, like, you could say the same with music. Like, it's probably not good to, like, listen to music from dusk till dawn, like, filling your brain with dopamine and different emotions and feelings. And, like, even if, like, pulling away from the spiritual, just in terms of, like, it's at the end of the day, there is, like, in movies and in music and in shows and in media, there's Puppet Master's Matrix or whatever, that there's a brainwashing or at least a perspective they're trying to instill in you.
So it's almost like, going back to the Matrix thing, it's almost like you just have to choose what cage/Matrix you want to play in, what game you want to play at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's maybe like there's a couple cages, like you have to, like, you know, health and like stuff like that. You got to break out of them. And then it's like, okay, there's games, like what games do I want to play? What infinite game do I want to choose, type thing?
Oh, actually, well, we brought up the Truman movie, but there was this scene, right? If you haven't seen the Truman movie, it's basically this guy doesn't know.
They've definitely seen it. That's a really popular movie.
Dude, I barely saw it for the first time yesterday, and I was mind blown.
Did you know of it before, though?
No, I've never heard of it or anything. I even got to thinking, I'm like, I wonder if there's a reason like they don't promote this movie as much, because it was such a good movie, and I'm like, The Matrix. But anyways, there was this line where the guy that was running the whole show, right, of this guy that did not know he was in the show, he was like basically in a simulation, he says he could leave at any time if his was more than just a vague ambition. If he was absolutely determined to discover the truth, there's no way we could prevent him, right? So basically he's basically saying that a lot of people choose to just stay in that cage, even though they know they're in a cage, right? They know that like there's a better world out there for them, but they choose to stay there regardless. And I thought that was really interesting, because we're talking about like the whole health stuff, right? We're talking about like, for us, it's like, bro, like you have more energy if you start eating better, like just do it. If you work out your disciplines, you're going to build up some discipline. But some people will never end up choosing that route, right? They rather just stay in their cage, if that makes sense. So what do you think, like, I don't know, like what do you think is the reason people just rather stay in their cages?
Comfort. It's predictable. Like, it's, if you want to, because if you choose to escape, then what do you fill it with? It's like in the Bible, when they leave Egypt, the tyranny of Egypt in the book of Exodus, they go through the desert for 40 years before they find the promised land, because if you destroy the structure, even if it was tyrannical, you're left with nothing. And sometimes it's better to have a tyrannical order than nothing. So people just choose to stay because it's comfortable.
Oh, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, in the movie it was fear. right? The whole island that
same
he
thing,
lived in
yeah.
was surrounded by water, and they made sure that his biggest fear was the water.
the childhood fear of the ocean or
The
whatever.
childhood
and
fear of
his
the
dad
ocean. So he
dying.
stayed there for the longest time, and the guy running the show was like, he'll never get out because he won't ever be able to conquer this fear of the ocean. But at the end, I think that's when you're put in a decision where you either have to overcome the fear and like be willing to die, like basically, or you're gonna just go back to that comfort zone and just stay there. And that's why most people don't make it out of the matrix, that cage that they know that they're in.
And it's weird because there's certain there's different cages and NPC mindsets or whatever. So it's like, for example, even though some people say like, oh yeah, everyone could be an entrepreneur, I don't think everyone can be an entrepreneur. And I think we need people to work under other people. So they have to have a certain lens for that where they enjoy. There's a lot of people that do. They need to be told exactly what to do. They will never take full autonomy over themselves. They need that. But, they would be the great number 3 in a corporation. They'll never be a good number 1, but they're the best number 3 and they serve that corporation really well. So there's certain ones where it's like, yeah, that matrix is it's good that we have that. We need guys to beat. Like, that's why self-improvement. So it's like, oh, we start self-improvement, we're already ahead of, you could say like 60, 70, 80% of guys. And then we want to beat out a lot of these other guys and get to the top. But we need those guys or we're not winning anything. If we're all winners, there's no winners.
Entrepreneurship's like a reverse matrix.
Yeah.
It's like escape the 9-to-5 matrix. Now everybody thinks they have to be an entrepreneur. It's like there's a lot of shit that you probably don't want to deal with.
And then a lot of people, they start their own whatever, and they're like, instead of a 9-to-5, they have a fucking like 7 a.m. to 12 a.m.
Yeah, making the same money, and they would be just as happy if they were working as like a coder for some company making $80K, and then you can invest. Like there's still, I think it was Andy Frisella talks about intrapreneurs instead of entrepreneurs, people who find like a company that's on the rise, and they're the one who like bust their ass inside the company, and then you get to the top, you get to have a normal life, you don't have to worry about every single thing. If the business goes down, you still have your job, and you have a good resume. Now you can go somewhere else. There's a lot of perks to not being an entrepreneur.
So I would say those are good, but I would say there are like objective, or at least it's my subjective thing, but I see it as objective, but it's like, the health thing. Like I want, regardless of, like
that's
the NPCs that work at Walmart or like this and that or whatever. I think everyone should understand that there's certain foods that will kill you earlier, give you cancer, like poison you, whatever. And there's certain medicines that mask symptoms but will cause others. They won't help you. The big pharma and big food are in the bed. Like you need to learn that. And I think everyone should have that introduced into their perspective. And if they choose, like, yeah, but I still want to have some of these. And, like, they get to decide how much poison they ingest compared to not. But I think everyone has a right to break out of that matrix. And that, like, so certain ones like that really eat me up. Like, when I'll, like, talk to family members, I'm like, this, like, every food you eat has the seed oil. Or, like, this Red 40 is going to give them ADHD or, like, allergies. Allegedly, based on some studies, I'm not a doctor. This is not medical advice, but I think there's certain ones like I want everyone to break out of, but then in certain games we need hierarchies or the game will cease to exist.
I think it's like that line I said. Like some people have that vague ambition, but like if it has to be something like a strong desire to kind of like break those matrices or those like certain things. But shoot, what was I gonna say? I had a really good point here. What were we saying? Wait, what were we saying right before this? Dang it, it was a good one.
I had a point too.
Okay, I got it.
Like,
I remember. So like you brought up a good point about like the whole like we need some people that are NPCs. Not everybody can be an entrepreneur. And one of the biggest things that I realized is because I used to be mind blown. I never understood why people would like didn't want to be in front of the camera, for example. Like, bro, don't you want to be the star, dude? Like, isn't that like, and I never understood, like, I've always wanted to be the star, like, and I never understood why someone would rather just be the videographer. I'm like, no, bro, screw it. Like, no one knows who the videographer is and all this stuff. But I really thought about it. And like, just like in movies, right? You have your stars, you have your writers. Most of the time, people don't know who the writers are. Yeah, some people do, but no one knows what they look like. They don't get the attention. They don't get the credit. They don't get the praise. But then I started thinking about, okay, not everybody wants to be the star, because when you're the star, you get all the attention, right? People are watching you. You have to watch every move you make. Like, there's so much burden and sacrifice that comes.
Very high highs and low lows.
Very high highs.
Like some people like that, and you could say that's kind of an ego. I mean, our egos pretty much drive everything, but like some people's egos based on, you want to say like nurture versus nature, their upbringing, and maybe some biological dispositions or maybe some moral whatevers. But some people, their egos want them to strive to be as famous as possible, and do all these things to get there. But other people's egos would say, dude, you have it really good. Like, this is super comfortable. You make this much a month. Like, you're doing pretty well. You're better than the average person. Like, stay here. You don't need to do that. Versus other people, their self will not settle for that, and it wants them to be higher.
There was this good quote. I saw a YouTube video the other day where this guy was like talking about goal setting and all this stuff. And he was talking about how basically what you have to do is you write down a list, right? You write down all your goals. You be as specific as possible. And then you literally just have to ask yourself one question. And you have to figure if you find the answer to this, then you're going to kind of like find the answer to pretty much everything you've been thinking about. These are your goals. And this is the price that you need to pay to achieve these goals. Are you willing to pay that price? And that's when you can really determine whether, okay, do I want those goals? Yes or no. Same thing goes with being the star or being, that's an example, right? Being a star, but there's like, do you want to be the person that builds the corporation or that works under the corporation? Right. And a lot of people are not willing to pay the price, because when you pay the price, basically you're making sacrifices, right? Are you willing to sacrifice time with family, time with your girlfriend, your lover, whatever it is? Like, because at the end of the day, anything that you ever want, there has to be some kind of sacrifice that comes with it. And that's when you answer the question, are you willing to pay that price? And a lot of people are not and it makes sense, right? Like,
yeah, I was gonna say, I don't want to paint them in a bad light of like, you're not willing to sacrifice as much as me to get where you want to be. It's like, no, your justifications are perfectly fine for you, and my justifications are perfectly fine for me.
It's like the last podcast when I brought up my dad. It's like, he's not willing to pay the price of not spending all this time with family, and I never have looked down upon that. I'm like, no, that's if that's what you care about is family, why would you sacrifice time for
like,
other stuff?
If he could like walk through a portal and he's like some rich millionaire that does all these crazy things, he'd probably be like, no, I want my family. Like, that's my purpose. This is my thing. Like, this is what satisfies myself.
It's like same thing with me being a coach. Is whenever I bring on a client, I'm like, hey, like, it's weird. It's like a marketing tactic, but at the same time, it's kind of like there's a lot of truth behind it. But it's like, once I show you what you're capable of, it's gonna suck, right? Because now you're gonna know what you're capable of, and whenever you fall short, it's gonna eat you up because you know you could be doing more. So it's kind of like, hey, once you take this red pill, it's like, you know what you're capable of, and it's really hard to sit there and like do nothing about it. And that's why it's like a lot of people just don't choose, to break out of certain cages, is because they don't want to pay that price. That's not what they want personally.
Yeah, but I think I want everyone to have the information and the perspectives and the understanding where they get to make the decision.
They get to decide if they want to pay the price, right?
Blinded and lied to by the media, the pharmacy, the big food, whatever.
That's essentially freedom, right?
Yeah. Is having I want people just to have the information. So I still want the truth to prevail. And then most people would still decide. Yeah. Like, if you told people like the truth of the world and like all of its disgusting entirety of corruption, a lot of people would be like, I like where I'm at. Like, I'm not trying to go overthrow anything or like break out of the matrix or be a billionaire.
So like, what do you think? What like one piece of advice would you give just people in general so that they are able to understand their options and whatnot?
It's kind of like I said earlier, one would be always challenge your preconceived beliefs. Gather other perspectives, and just always be willing to learn, have a student mindset, have a growth mindset, and be willing to adopt certain things. That way, because a lot of people that are in the matrix are blind, that are like, they're not sacrificing, they're not doing all these things. They just don't understand what's possible. So if they get woken up to all this information, they read a couple books, they watch a couple podcasts, they experience a couple things, all of a sudden that person could end up being a fucking millionaire or something because he had the perspective and it allowed him to shift his perspective and his identity to achieve those things. Versus other people, they'll gather all that and be like, okay, but I still want to do that, but I want everyone to have the information and the education, I guess.
What's your one piece of advice for people to again have those options and whatnot?
So the piece of advice is like to escape the matrix?
Not to escape, but to know your options, and then you could decide what price you're willing to pay, whether you want to pay that price or like what purpose you want to take. I'm thinking the wrong way. What piece of advice would you give to people so that they are able to truly choose their own path of freedom, I guess?
You gotta pursue your own curiosity.
Yeah,
I suppose.
That's what I was gonna say.
Because
be curious as fuck.
Yeah, and I don't know if anybody's ever completely free. I think this has sort of been the whole point of this episode. You become free within I mean,
it's perspective too, though.
Like I'm a firstborn, and that nature versus nurture thing means I think you're the same way. I don't know. Are you a firstborn?
We're all firstborns.
Okay,
yeah.
it leads to like they show like firstborns are more naturally leaders, and I have a very A-type personality. So, am I even completely free? That's just who I am, right? Like I couldn't stand. I cannot stand people telling me what to do. That's why I've like my whole life has almost been devoted to nobody telling me what to do. That's why I'm like I have to work for myself. I have to be on the internet so I can go wherever the hell I want. Like it has to be that way. It's like I don't even know if you get complete freedom. So maybe even along with pursuing curiosity, which pursuing curiosity does this, but it's like know thyself. Knowing yourself is the freedom. There's no ultimate freedom where like you can rebuild yourself, sort of like there's a seed of who you really are. Figuring out who you are is the way you find your freedom and your motives and choices, and I think going for your curiosities helps you figure that out.
I think it's
like
really
education
close.
and introspection, like education to see everything, broaden, like widen your lens, and then introspection to realize who exactly you are.
Well, you go into like, I don't know, you're playing sports and you notice that you're naturally the one taking charge in a situation. You figure out, oh, I like that. Or you're, I don't know, I remember one time I was working a job pressure washing. I was like, I don't like this, right? So you figure out these kinds of things and then getting comfortable with it. And the more you do different things and figure out what you like and what you don't like and just go out into the world. Again, the circumambulation idea, which I think is so big, which is just keep moving forward and you'll find out the center of yourself. It's like if you're trying things, you'll figure out more about who you are and you'll get rid of these like things holding you back. Like you'll go in this direction and you'll realize, oh, well, this is not my parents' beliefs. So you run into this conflict with what your parents tell you is the truth. And now you're fighting up against that and you have to decide, am I going to be free and be who I really am, or am I going to stay in that cage? And then it's like, well, this career is going to upend all of these things. And you got to make these decisions as you go through life pursuing your curiosity. I know when I was in college, like everyone I hung out with was drunk, stoned, with no ambition, playing video games and shit like that. I found entrepreneurship and loved that, and that ended up changing the entire direction of my life, upended most of my social life. I dropped out of college. I mean, it became this big thing because I pursued that curiosity, figured out more of who I was. And I think that's the path to freedom, as close to freedom as you can get.
Honestly, if you change like everything you're saying, like I completely with I would just change one thing, and it'd be figure out who you want to be. So like I never really like accepted that like there's like who you really are, who you deep down like. I think it's more once you figure out who you actually want to be, then you can make decisions based on that, right? So it's almost like another way I would put it to like is who you want to be. Like going after who you want to be is essentially being who you are.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree, because there's somebody, I can't remember who said it, but the people that we find inspiring are showing us something within ourselves that we haven't tapped into.
Yeah.
I think when you figure out who you want to be, you're basically figuring out who you are. You just have externalized it and not realized, oh, I'm already that thing. And there's just these obstacles in the way. Maybe you feel like a big one, especially for, at least for me, was like the idea that you had to save yourself for marriage was such a big thing in Christianity. That really was always hammered into me, and I never really, like, it just didn't resonate with me. And that actually was a big thing that probably drove me away from Christianity.
You think that's why, like, you stay, like, you're still a virgin today?
Yeah, that is it. Yeah.
We'll take care of that.
But what was it? I think I lost my fucking train of thought. Damn it.
I mean, yeah. I mean, basically, like, I feel like there's a person you are right now, who you really are, and there's a person that you want to become. But I think once you figure out the person you want to become, we were going back to the whole, like, how do you get into that position where you know your options, and then you get to decide what options you want to pursue, what sacrifices you want to make, is decide who you want to become. But in order to do that, you have to be really curious. I think you have to, like, be overwhelmed with curiosity. And again, that's one thing that we could have called this podcast like Curious Children or Curious Kids, because we're like talking about stuff that I think we thought at a small scale when we were little because of our curiosity.
Like child's education.
People are like,
we got shapes on the screen, like ABCs.
Like, I want to hear this.
I remember what I was going to say. I wanted to make this point, though. I do think this is important. So, like, I had that belief about like, oh, you're supposed to save yourself for marriage and all these kinds of things. And so I thought that I was the guy who just wanted to get married and have a family and all these things. And then I had this other motive that wanted me to be like a very different person, but I felt guilty about even having that motive of who I wanted to be. And I realized that I was actually the guy that I wanted to be. It's just I had all this guilt in the way of it.
Yeah.
That was convincing me that I wasn't that guy. And so who you want to be is actually who you really already are. You just have all these obstructions in the way.
Which is stemmed from fear, right?
Yeah.
Because you're scared of something. That's why you like feel guilt. Like for example,
Fear,
the whole
guilt,
going back
all
to the,
yeah. I mean,
the
actually,
religious thing.
all negative emotions kind of come down to fear. You're like guilty because you're afraid of consequences.
Something's gonna happen,
like,
or people are gonna see you, or they're gonna disapprove, or you're gonna disappoint somebody. So like it all comes down to the Truman Show.
And explain, and that, I mean, that's probably a big thing in terms of Tate's rise to fame, because we were arguing that Tate's like a net positive and probably like a morally good when you boil him down. But Tate probably made a lot of people see, they looked at him and they saw parts like, which even with me, because when I was growing up, I always had this idea of, I just want to be comfortable. I want to make $100,000 a year and have a nice house and a nice bed and couches, like just a normal, normie-ass life. And then when I started learning more about, you know, like the baller influencers and stuff, and even Tate to an extent, but I'm sure a lot of people, what I'm trying to get to is like Tate, people saw Tate and they're like, dang, I thought I was greedy or selfish for wanting to make a lot of money. I thought I was selfish for looking at any girl besides my girlfriend. And then he shows that, oh, you can do that and be successful and still be viewed by a lot of rational people as like morally good, boiled down, or a net positive, or at least like a neutral person, not like an evil person.
That goes back same thing with like, they knew who they wanted to be. They were just so clouded in guilt and programming that they couldn't be it.
Implementing the shadow.
Yeah, yeah.
So going to what you were saying about finding who you want to be, and like maybe there's a part of that in you already and becoming that, reminds me, yeah, that's fucking funny that the fucking psycho-cybernetics is right here. But the idea in like the first quarter of psycho-cybernetics is like reinventing your self-image, but it's in turn of you find out what you want your identity to be, like what you want out of life and what identity would achieve that. And then you like visualize it, and then you have to provide all the justification that cements that identity into you. I feel like ties into what you were saying.
And you won't become that person like until you actually like start
the justification
doing,
part of things. So it's like we can visualize it. Like visualization will help a lot of like who you want to be in 10 years, and it'll help, you know, a lot of unconscious or subconscious habits or choices will be helped, guided towards the right path by the visualization, and thus you will take actions that are in line with that identity you want to be, and over time it cements that identity into the current version of you, and then you're that guy, and then you're him.
Yeah, it's basically, it's kind of like us three individually, we can confidently say, well, I don't know, at least I think we can confidently say that we have not escaped our matrices yet, but we are like a little aware of them, and we're fighting to become those people that can escape those matrices. And I was thinking, I thought about it because I went on a flight yesterday. I went to Denver, and it's funny because every time you fly, you're like sitting there on the plane, and then like as the plane starts going higher and higher, you see the city just gets smaller and all the cars get smaller, and you realize like how small, and like this is perspective, I wouldn't say insignificant, but how small you really are in the world. And once you realize that like as you zoom out, you're like, oh shoot, if I'm that small, that's where perspective comes in, right? You can even think that you're insignificant, or you can use it like to your benefit and think that any of your problems are insignificant, right? That issue that you're stressed out about, it's not really that big of a deal.
It's like the fucking dumb atheist cope argument, but it's like there's like a little bit of truth where it's like, bro, you're literally a speck on a giant rock hurling through space. Like nothing matters, which is very like stupid and atheistic and nihilistic. But there is truth in like understanding the insignificance of your problems, and most problems are created by the ego and like the default mode network, where it's like you're anxious about the future, depressed about the past. Whereas if you can become like guide yourself towards like mindfulness, self-awareness into the present, a lot of that suffering kind of dissolves, or at least for a most part, or you gain control over it at least to an extent.
And then at that point, once you gain control over it and you're self-aware, that then you can start becoming a bigger person instead of being that like speck of dust. You can start building yourself, building this energy, this team, start influencing other people, and that's when you just go larger and larger to where again, I think that's what we're kind of after is we're trying to
Right.
escape our own matrices, our own cages, and we haven't done it yet, but we're on a mission to.
And it's like, I think, but since we kind of broken out of the base level, which you could argue the base level is the NPCs, the bots, the matrix slaves, whatever. We've broken out of that in terms of expanding our awareness. So just getting out of that initial thing, which is why which is why basic self-improvement, basic education, masculinity, self-development, fitness, all that breaks you out of that first thing. And then you finally get to see, oh, this is like an infinite game, but I can just keep developing and developing and developing. But you need to break out of that NPC level of blindness, pretty much.
Yeah, which again, just overcoming fears.
Yeah.
All right.
Woo! All right, everyone, we need you to comment. All right, we had a lot of discussion. We had a lot of discussion on this podcast and a lot of topics, and we need to know what you think about it. If you have any other perspectives to offer, maybe you completely and utterly disagree with us, or you want to reaffirm some things we said. Please leave a comment below. I want the comments below to be a discussion on the topics we discussed in this podcast. All of our YouTube channels are going to be in the description below. If you made it this far, just comment. I don't really care what. Just it'll show that you actually watched this far because most people don't comment. But if you made it this far, thank you. That helps with the average view duration immensely and is going to help the algorithm promote the podcast. But that's it. Check out our stuff. Be undeniable. That goes corny as fuck.